Welcome to the devotional series of Psalm a Day, Keep Satan Away, the podcast edition, episode 67, subtitled Blessings. And I'm Pastor Dewap. Before we get to the Psalm today, I wanted to do a reminder announcement about our upcoming trip to Greece. We'll be leaving the United States on April 29th and be in country through May 9th, coming back on May 9th to the United States. We've entitled the trip, Following in the Footsteps of the Apostle Paul, A Foot in Two Worlds. And we'll be following the chronology of the book of Acts, Paul's second missionary journey, actually the second half of his second missionary journey. We'll also take a cruise into the Aegean Sea, which gives us the opportunity to visit Ephesus, which is a great ancient city and a place where Paul also started a church. And we'll visit some other Greek islands that have biblical significance, as well as a couple of other islands that have no biblical significance, but that's where the cruise ship stops. They're good touristic places to stop, and so we'll have a couple of quote-unquote vacation days built in. So a really cool trip that combines faith pilgrimage, learning, togetherness and community, a faith community, as well as some downtime. So if you're interested in that, reach out to me, text, email, telephone, drop a comment in the podcast comments, and we can connect offline and I can give you more details. Now on to Psalm 67, which is a top fiver for me and holds a really cool place, I believe, in Jewish theological and worship history. And we'll examine some of that at the end. But in the meantime, I'm going to read the text for you. I'm going to use a translation from Robert Alter. He is a Jewish scholar and Hebrew expert, and I love his work. Sometimes his translations are a little bit wooden, and so they don't really sound right when you're reading them. But this particular psalm, I think it reads so beautifully, and I wanted to use it today as a change-up from what we typically do with the NIV. So here we go, Psalm 67. For the lead player on stringed instruments, a psalm, a song. May God grant us grace and bless us. May he shine his face upon us, Selah. To know on the earth your way, among all the nations your rescue or your salvation. Nations acclaim you, O God, all peoples acclaim you. Nations rejoice in glad song, for you rule peoples rightly or justly, and nations on earth you lead, Selah. Nations acclaim you, O God, all peoples acclaim you. That's a repetition from verse 3. The earth gives its yield. May God our God bless us. May God bless us, and all the ends of the earth fear him. Psalm 67. The reason that this psalm is in my top 5 is because it exhibits some of the really cool Jewish literary teaching techniques that we've already noticed. The first that I want to talk about today is that of repetition. In this particular case, it's repetition of a particular word, which brings emphasis to that word. The Hebrew word barach is to bless, and it's repeated 3 times in this short text of just 7 lines. It's in verse 1, it's in verse 6, and it's in verse 7. Thus, we can say that this is a psalm of God's blessing. Now, the second thing that I want to emphasize in terms of a cool teaching technique is one we've talked about a lot, which is intertextuality, which is this idea that the Bible is having a conversation with itself. It is the writer of a text inviting you to go and refer to another part of the biblical text to see what that particular biblical text has to say. And that will shed light on the text that he is writing. So this idea, intertextuality, occurs here with this particular psalm. We'll note in verse 1 that the writer says, may God grant us grace and bless us. And then he says, may he shine his face upon us. Now, those that have heard me teach a long time have known that each service that I lead or each public event that I'm leading that requires a benediction, I always end with the Aaronic blessing, which comes from the Torah, comes from Numbers chapter 6, verses 24 through 26. Let me recite that for you. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord shine his face upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord lift his countenance upon you and grant you peace. So that's Numbers chapter 6, verse 24 through 26. And again, let me repeat here from verse 1 of Psalm 67. May God grant us grace and bless us, and may he shine his face upon us. So the language, including blessing and shining his face upon us, these are going directly back to Numbers chapter 6. It's as if the author of Psalm 67 is saying, if you want to understand what I'm trying to say, go back to Numbers chapter 6. So what do we do? What happens when we go back to Numbers chapter 6? And we start to look around the Aaronic blessing and what's before it and after it. And what we find is quite interesting, in my opinion. Just before the Aaronic blessing, we have God giving instruction for something called the vow of a Nazirite. It was a special vow or a special endeavor that a righteous and obedient Jew would take in order to show his devotion to God and his obedience to God in a very public way. It involved not cutting the hair, and it involved not eating any food or drink products that came from grapes. So if you know ancient Judaism, wine is a big part of not just the diet, but also of worship. And so not eating or drinking wine or eating grapes is a big deal. It's a very public thing. And so that's the vow of a Nazirite. And then when you finish the vow, there's a very strict way in which you finish that vow. And then what comes right after that is the Aaronic blessing. It's as if in Numbers chapter 6, God is saying to us, when you're obedient, when you go the extra mile for me, I will go the extra mile for you. I will bless you. And so the Aaronic blessing comes right after that. And here we see, again, this writer of Psalm 67 telling us to go back to Numbers chapter 6 and see the obedience that results in God's blessing. Now, I don't think it's a coincidence that if we look at Psalm 66, which was our previous psalm, we noted that at the very center of the theology of that psalm was testing. God tests us as part of our faith journey. And when we handle that test obediently, it becomes a public witness and testimony to all that's good about God. So it's very similar, you could argue, as the vow of the Nazirite. So I think Psalm 67, coming right after Psalm 66, is emphasizing this idea of blessing when we're obedient to God. So that's the next cool literary technique that I think we see here, intertextuality. Well, teaching techniques don't stop with repetition and intertextuality. This psalm exhibits even more cool teaching techniques. So if you look at the psalm itself, there are 7 lines, not including the superscript. And we remember that numbers always mean things symbolically in Jewish theological thought. And the number 7 is a special number. It's the number of completion. It's the number of perfection. It's the number of God. And so this particular psalm has 7 lines. And we would expect, like we saw in the chiastic structure of our last psalm, that right smack in the middle, that 4th line, might be the center point or the central theological theme, being the middle line of 7. And sure enough, let's read verse 4. May the nations be glad and sing for joy, for you, God, rule the peoples rightly or justly, and guide the nations of the earth. Further, it is bracketed by that repeated refrain that I mentioned. May the peoples praise you, O God. May all the peoples praise you. That's verses 3 and verses 5. So, stuck in the middle of that, kind of elevated, just like in the chiastic structure from Psalm 66, we have verse 4. In the center point of verse 4, for you, God, rule the peoples justly. And interestingly, if you count the number of words in each of the lines, in Hebrew, by the way, not in English, it's symmetric. There's 7 words in verse 1, then 6 words in verses 2 and 3, then 10 words in that central verse 4, then 6 words in 5 and 6, and 7 again in verse 7. So all of these techniques force us to really focus on verse 4. God's rule in all the nations of the earth is just. It's right. And we also note that he is the God for everybody. Let's read verse 4 again. May the nations, not just Israel, may the nations be glad and sing for joy. For you, God, rule the peoples, not just the people of Israel, but the peoples justly or rightly, and guide the nations, not just Israel, of the earth. So, the theological point that this psalm is making is that God is not just the God of the Hebrew people, he is the God of everybody. So let's bring it all together for Psalm 67. God, who rules rightly and justly, is ready to shine his face upon you and be gracious to you and to show you favor and to bring you blessings. whether you are a religious insider like the Israelites were or not, and no matter what you are doing or what you have done. So today, open your spirit to receive that blessing from the one who was and is to come. Now, as I promised, and as a PS, I'd like to give you a little bit of insight into this psalm's place in Jewish tradition. This psalm in art form is often displayed in synagogues as part of what is called Shiviti Hashem, which means to set a place or to prepare a place for the name. And of course, Hashem, the name, is a euphemism for God. Ancient Judaism shunned any images of humans or animals in worship art, lest they be construed as idols. But as time went on, graphic displays of the biblical text became Jewish people's religious and worship art. By the 14th century, and because of the 7-line symmetrical structure of Psalm 67, which we've studied, it became associated with the 7-stemmed Jewish menorah, which goes way back to Moses' time when he was leading Israel through the desert. So I wanted to show you a picture of what that worship art is as an example of this text art, which uses the text itself to create this 7-stem menorah. And that will be attached to the text part of this post. So if you're just pushing the button to listen to the podcast or watch the podcast, you have to actually click into the post. And you can scroll down through the script and you'll get to the picture of the Psalm 67 as a menorah. And as a second PS, and before we close out, I wanted to give a shout out to DJ Ravonda, who was very instrumental in helping me do some research on the Psalm 67 backstory. And as a result of the intertextual conversation that we looked at between Psalm 67 and number 6, 24 through 26, the Aaronic blessing, I wanted to share with you one of our top 5 songs from Joshua Aaron. It is word for word from the Aaronic blessing of Numbers 6. And if you're looking for a way to memorize a few lines of Hebrew, this is a really good way to try to do that, as the song is totally in Hebrew. So give that a click as well and tell me what you think. And that's it for today. Godspeed and shalom. Pastor D. Walk signing out.